Okay, so I want to talk about how I structure my water. And so when I say water structure, it actually has to do with the alignment of the hydrogen and oxygen bonds and also the bonds between water and other water molecules. So when you vortex water inside of a magnetic field, a couple of things happen. One, you end up breaking the van der Waals bonds, which are the bonds between water molecules. So from water to water, holding that together. Most water that you drink is very heavily clustered, which means it's a large molecule, so that it has a hard time entering the cell. So when you actually magnetize and vortex this water, it restructures the water and breaks up those bonds so that you have individual water molecules that can actually enter the cell. The other piece of this puzzle is it strengthens the hydrogen bonds between the oxygen and hydrogen. And so when hydrogen and oxygen are usually shaped like this, and you have the hydrogen bonds vibrating from their light input, when you start to break the van der Waals bonds and you start to structure these hydrogen bonds here, they actually begin to flatten out. And so now, in the same volume of water, or you end up having a lot more density of water molecules that are not bonded together but are isolated. A couple of things happen. One, those water molecules, because they're smaller, are better able to enter the cell, whereas these clustered water molecules cannot do that. So now you're suddenly getting extra hydrogen that's able to cross this mitochondrial membrane. As that hydrogen crosses the mitochondrial membrane, it binds to the ATP synthase, which is a turbine inside your mitochondria. When that happens, it spins that turbine up and generates a magnetic field that begins to attract oxygen towards the mitochondria to take the electrons via the electron chain transport. Okay? And so what happens is, as these protons from the hydrogen cross the cell membrane, that creates time that allows proton fold over and different things to happen because of the electric gradient that is created across the cell membrane. So when you structure this water, and I'll show you, I use my Berkey right now. There's a couple of other things that I'm going to be adding to this equation. But what I've done is I basically put a turbine inside the Berkey that creates a vortex inside the Berkey. And then I've added rare earth neodymium magnets as well as a couple of ceramic ones that I had laying around. And what I do is I have south-facing magnets. Some of them are inside and sealed. Some of them are too big to put in there that I didn't want to put in the water. But what I do is I basically bathe the water in a magnetic field as that water vortexes. Some of the other layers that I'll probably be adding to this are infrared light, UV light, different things to start to structure the water information in very specific ways so that my body's getting the energy that it needs from the water. Since ultimately, at the most fundamental levels, whether you're taking fats, proteins, and carbs, all of those are eventually being broken down to pyruvate and acetyl-CoA and eventually into oxygen and hydrogen for those electrons to be used by your mitochondria to produce ATP and other forms of energy, NADH, that kind of thing. So what I have found is that as long as my body has the ingredients, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, it can literally make anything that it needs in terms of proteins, fats, and carbs from those building blocks if it has the instructions that are correct. So the way that this magnetic field works, when you have light coming from the sun, it causes those hydrogen bonds to vibrate in any of 6 different ways, or combinations of them. So now you have a vibration element of this structure, and then you have an alignment element of this structure that comes from the magnetic field inside the mitochondria. So suddenly you have a 3D resonance structure that is created outside of the cell that tells the cell and the DNA what hormones, proteins, and enzymes to produce at different times of day, because the light coming from the sun is different at different times of day. And so those light signals effectively allow you to regulate your endocrine system so that those different organs are producing the right hormones at the right times of day so your body can actually operate. Eating protein, carbs, and fats is not that you are missing certain amino acids and minerals and things in your body. It's about the light content that those minerals actually contain that your body needs to be able to process. And so if you understand that fundamentally your body needs light information from these materials, and you're making sure that you're getting that light information, now suddenly your body can be fueled by different kinds of elements that it couldn't be fueled by before, because the things you're eating actually aren't causing you to leak electrons. So when you're eating a high polyunsaturated fatty acid diet, so if you're eating nuts and you're eating pretty much anything out of the aisles in a grocery store, and most, there's a whole list of them, I've drawn a blank on it right now, but pretty much everything in the grocery store, if it says that it has 10 grams of fat, and it only lists 1 gram of saturated fat or 9 grams of saturated fat, you have to assume that all the rest of the fat that is in that content, even if it's not on the label, is a polyunsaturated or monounsaturated fat. And so those unsaturated fat refers to the strength of the hydrogen bonds in in those fats. And so when those hydrogen bonds are weaker because they're unsaturated, they oxidize a whole lot easier. And how does that happen? Oxidation happens when they're exposed to oxygen or heat. And in our body, we're 98.6 degrees. So as soon as that stuff enters our bloodstream, it immediately oxidizes. And that means you start losing electrons from your different tissues. And as that starts to happen, inflammation starts to occur and dysregulation in your endocrine system starts to happen. Okay? And so I use this structured water for a couple of different reasons. When I structure my water this way, not only am I able to get more water and hydrogen into my cells, what happens is that hydrogen is a selective antioxidant. It is the smallest molecule in the universe. It is also the most powerful antioxidant that exists. And so what happens is you start to eject debris out of your cells because the clathrate in that water, and you can look up what clathrate means, C-L-A-T-H-R-A-T-E. You can look up what clathrate is, and that basically is water's ability to surround those toxins in kind of like a buckyball type structure and carry them out of your body. And so if those structures are not in position, you have a very hard time detoxing. So a couple of things keep happening to people. When you have a high PUFA diet, or you have light dysregulation in your system, you start to have anxiety and depression and all these different illnesses that are coming up, because those are literally dysregulations in the structure of the water on the outside of your cells that alters the way that information is translated in and out of the cell. And so being able to have your cells communicate properly, because they just send and receive light and that's how they communicate, we want to regulate the way that they can actually communicate, so that if we're giving it additional information it doesn't need, your body can just push it through and you can eat for joy as opposed to eating for necessity. Okay? And that inflammation actually eventually leads to that calcification that we end up seeing in a lot of people's tissues. Now, if you look at vegan diets and the vegetable diets and all these different things that I keep bringing up over the last couple of weeks, you start to see a pattern that's happening. When you have these vegetables that have so many inorganic minerals, so these vegetables, even if they are organic vegetables, even if you're growing them yourself organically, if they are outside under the sky, they're being watered with acid rain and all kinds of the different solar radiation chemicals that are being dropped into the plants. And the plants absorb that. They don't just sit on the surface. And so you end up having all of these different endocrine disruptors embedded into the plants that you're eating. So beyond the plants themselves not being good for you, even that stuff gets embedded into them, making them further not good for you. Okay? And so these plants have been genetically modified for thousands of years to be edible. Vegetables do not exist in any botanical documentation. And so what you want to look at is not being married to the idea that vegetables are healthy, because we've been programmed to think that that's the case. We don't need vegetables. We need the light content that some of those vegetables might contain. And a lot of times we become dysregulated because we start eating all of these vegetables in a location, because our zip code determines our health code on some level. We end up being in a location that does not have a full spectrum of light to compensate for the lacking light in that vegetation. Now, if you start to put those puzzles together and you see that these vegetables have a lot of inorganic minerals, these inorganic minerals are inorganic because they're not carbon bonded and they don't have the heme groups attached to the iron. And this is because those bacteria in your gut want to eat that stuff. That's what they eat. So they take in all of those inorganic minerals and they output lipopolysaccharides. Lipopolysaccharides, LPS, are endocrine disruptors. Okay, and so these bacteria are doing two things. They're outputting endocrine disruptors that are dysregulating your system. They're outputting pulses of light based on the information that you're giving them. And so some of these foods that you're eating, like vegetation, can't be digested without those bacteria. Why not? Because those bacteria are needed. Those bacteria want those foods. And so they're asking for those foods because it's fueling them, not fueling you. And what ends up happening is those pulses of light coming from the bacteria are pulses of light the same way from the sun. That starts to structure the water on the outside of your cell membranes and alters the way that you perceive the world around you. That's why people who have gut bacteria that's out of balance end up having bad moods and energy issues and different things that show up. It is all a light arrhythmia issue that boils down to the type of light that you're getting. Now, when you structure your water, the ability of that water to hold memory improves. And that memory lasts actually for a fairly long period of time. And you can also then start to embed different light frequencies into that water so that when you're drinking, you're getting the right information that your body needs. And you don't need to look at the conventional nutrition the way that everybody has been programming you to believe that you need. All of these minerals, all of these different things are really on some level just light content and light information that's necessary. Now, I haven't cut out all minerals and things from my system. I tend to still take Shilajit, which is phenomenal, but I don't eat vegetables. Anything else I'm getting in terms of the nutrient density is from the meats that I eat. The animals that have those nutrients, the way those nutrients are stored in their tissues is much more bioavailable because of the way that it has been processed by the animal and light stored in their tissues when we eat it. And the other piece is that when you cook that meat, you end up cooking the light content out of it. Okay, and so there's a lot of layers to the way that this can work. You don't need to start there. The whole point is that it's not about the way that you're eating, it's about getting the things out of the way that are in your way from being able to eat the way that you actually enjoy and desire to eat, right? And so part of that is eliminating the polyunsaturated fatty acids for a while so you can replace those unsaturated fats in your tissues with saturated fats. The other piece is to kill parasites, bacteria, and other elements in that category. And I think people don't realize that that parasites, let's just make a big category here, alter over 1,000 hormones in your body. How do they do that? By altering the light and the structure around your cells. And so you start to see all of these gut bacteria and why your gut determines how your brain works, because the bacteria in your gut are altering the light content that is being sent to your brain, and there's a break in that kind of communication because of the creatures that are manipulating you. Okay? And so what we want to do is look at different protocols to start to kill off those bacteria and get the debris that's in your cells to be ejected and replaced with healthier water. Okay? And so there's a lot of steps to this. You can't just do a 7-day or 30-day cleanse and expect to kill the parasites. Because what kills the worm doesn't kill the larva. What kills the larva doesn't kill the egg. And so it's a cyclical thing that you have to do for probably close to a year before you stop seeing the results. Now, most of it happens up front. Most of the benefit happens up front. And what you'll find is, one, your energy gets better. You need a whole lot less sleep. Your brain works a lot better. And you also end up needing a whole lot less food because these guys aren't craving all the food and eating all the food that you're putting into your body. Now, it's a lifestyle that needs to be cultivated on some level in the morning when you start doing the coffee enemas and turpentine cleanses and taking, let's say ivermectin, Parental. There's a lot of list of things that you can do, and you don't necessarily want to do them all at once. You kind of want to layer it in because the bacteria and things get smart and start hiding behind the biofilm. So you need to clear the biofilm at certain times to get to them, and then it's a process. And so part of what I am bringing out to you guys is a better understanding of how how to start to follow that process so that these things that are programming your reality get out of the way, and you can start to make choices based on your desires rather than your programs.